2025. I'm honored to be joined by a distinguished panel of experts who will bring a diverse perspectives to our today's panel. First of all, I would like to introduce our panelists. I have here at my right, Maria Jose Guerrero. She is a lawyer and professional in government and public affairs from University of Los Andes. She is a teaching assistant in international economic law and coach of the university team for the John H. Jackson Moot Court competition. Maria Jose is currently an associate in Strategy LLP. Here to my left, I have Eleanor Irney. She is a counsel at Hughes Hoover and Reed in Washington, D.C., where she has practiced both international commercial and investor state arbitration for almost 10 years. She represents both state entities and commercial parties in arbitrations in the energy, mining, aviation, and construction sectors, among others. She's also an adjunct assistant professor at American University's Washington College of Law, where she teaches international commercial arbitration and coaches the school's Wilhelmsburg International Commercial Arbitration Moot Court team. Fernando Mayer, he is the General Director of Foreign Investment at the Ministry of Economy. Previously, he served as General Director of Services and Investment. In that capacity, he was involved in the USMCA negotiations in the areas of digital trade, temporary entry of business persons, and energy. Then I have Carlos Bejar. He is a leading expert in international trade and arbitration with over 25 years of experience in more than 30 international disputes and numerous treaty negotiations on trade and investment. He served in Mexico's Ministry of Economy, where he was part of the core team in WTO and NAFTA and CPTPP litigation and negotiations. He is currently a local partner at White & Case in Mexico City. And last but not least, I have Hugo Romero. He is a partner of RRH Consultores. He is also a professor of international law at the Faculty of Law of this university. He advises clients on international trade law and investment law. He worked at the Ministry of Economy for over 15 years in international trade law and trade and investment disputes. So without further ado, I will pass the floor to Maria Jose Guerrero to present our panel of today.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. So my name is Maria Jose, and I will be giving you a brief presentation, if this moves. Yeah, a brief presentation of the context of the situation and topics that will be further delved into by our panelists. So, it's not working, I'm sorry. Okay. Perfect. So we have a paradigm shift in U.S. trade and investment policy. And this also started with the NAFTA change. And I think we have already discussed this from the beginning of our panelists, but I will just give a brief introduction for the ones that are coming up new here. So a few key legal changes from NAFTA to the USMCA. So the ISDAs was eliminated between the US and Canada, which basically means that no Canadian investor or US investor can initiate a dispute among each other. We had another change on the ISDAs between Mexico and the US. It was not the same as Canada, but it was a limited scope, which means that arbitration can only be initiated in cases such as oil, gas, and other sectors. And finally, we had another change of labor and environmental enforcement strength. There was another important and major thing that changed, that it is the TPP withdrawal. So we know that 12 members initiated this consultation in order to sign an agreement that will further on strained trade in global trade. However, the US withdrew, but the remaining 11 countries did sign this. Why is this so important? Because these had participation of Asia. Countries such as Mexico, Chile, and Peru were participating in this agreement, which they finally did participate, but the US withdrew, and that made a change. So finally, the name of this agreement was the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. Then unilateral trade measures that were implemented by the US. Okay, perfect. So we have a few measures, and I will give you some examples. These are not all, but we have Section 232 and Section 301. The Section 232 was about steel and aluminum. So in this case, it was invoked on March of 2018 under the Trade Expansion Agreement of 1962. Which were the key affected partners in this case? Canada, Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina, which had mainly exporters of this type of products. Then we also had Section 301, that it was embarked on the same year, but on July. And in this case, it was targeted under tariffs from China. This had an indirect effect on supply changes of Mexico and Brazil. And then, okay, I will go. Okay, so we have a regional impact. In this case, we have two types of the regional impact. So the one I just discussed about Canada and Mexico facing tariffs, even though that they were a part of the NAFTA, but also WTO disputes arise from this previous tariff, which meant that countries such as Canada, the European Union, and even they were faced again the US. And on 2022, the WTO dispute settlement body decided against the United States, recognizing that there was a violation. However, this was not recognized by the US, which further on strained the idea that they were moving away from multilateral agreements. And the Latin American responses. So this is the final block of the presentation. In this case, we will discuss a few measures and consequences that were faced here in Latin America. So for example, Brazil has now an alternative treaty that does not take into account arbitration when it comes to dispute. Colombia and Ecuador have renegotiated their bids in order to make them more specific with the specific clauses. For example, for cases for the fair and equitable treatment, most favored nation, and other clauses that are now harder for disputes to arise. And then we have an emphasis on state regulatory powers, and regional blocs have come to have more importance nowadays, such as the Mercosur, the Pacific Alliance, and other type of regional blocs that are now very important. Why are they now important? Because they are now being trusted by the countries, such as in Latin America, to make investment arbitration. Which are the practical effects on dispute patterns and investment? There is a decline in ISDA's claims by U.S. investors because, of course, with the change of the USMCA, this has lowered and has a deep impact, but it is because partly due to the reduced access of the USMCA. There is also a big shift to contractual arbitration, which means that now the parties are now relying on their contract-based clauses, but it is dangerous in the case that there is now it is not specific enough as a treaty, that we usually have these clauses more sorted out. And finally, there is a focus on legal certainty and enforcement because now the countries are looking for legal stability within their investment. And new trends in intra-regional dispute have arisen. So we now see more investment between Latin American countries within each other. And with that being said, I think that now we have a little bit of context of the decisions made by the US and now how Latin America has responded in some way. So I will now yield the floor to Samantha. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Jose, for giving us this broad perspective of the topics we are going to be addressing with our panelists. Certainly, some of the measures that you just mentioned were taken during President Trump's first administration. And now, since he took office last January, we are seeing a wide range of measures in different areas, including trade and investment. Not only this increase of the use of Section 232, Section 301, but also another law came into play, which is AIPA, which is being used by the president to impose tariffs. So traders and investors around the globe are facing a climate of legal uncertainty that pervades their business relationships. It is difficult to predict the course of the rest of Trump's administration, but many agree that this uncertainty will remain. So I would like to start with Carlos. Is the United States approaching a turning point in the region that will undermine trade and investment? And is it possible that the United States can come back from that turning point?
Thank you, Samantha, and nice being here with you all. Thank you for the invitation to Ricardo Ramírez, RRH Consultores, to the Instituto de Investigaciones Jurídicas. Carlos, I don't see him around, but thank you very much for having me in this panel. And with regard to this question, the first thing that I noticed that it's not a question that we drafted, but I'll try to address it as I see fit. The first thing, I guess, is this affecting investment? I think it is clearly affecting investment, at least in Mexico. I mean, from my perspective and the information I've gotten from deals that we were working at is that many of them just got freezed. They just are waiting to see how water settled down and whether to continue with the projects, whether to enlarge their capacity in Mexico or no. So it has an effect of chilling the investments in the region. On the counterpart, the question is whether this is actually increasing investments in the US, which apparently it is, and that's actually what I understand to be the main objective of many of these measures, or one of the underlying objectives of the measures adopted by the US, because most of them are related with tariffs, and they don't hit or they don't cause the same effect on all industries. So the problem with these measures is that they are very uncertain as to the effects because it depends on each industry, on each country. So it's very hard to say that this increase of tariffs will have the same effect in all industries, with all companies and in all countries. So I think that's why until this is not clear, people will not be taking important decisions, I guess, although there has been already important announcements of moving or increasing investments in the US, particularly in the automotive sector, which is one of the main, how to say, characters or main industries that are of interest, particularly to countries like Mexico. The other side of these measures is that it has been so fast. There has been so many things in such a short period of time that it is very difficult to come to any conclusions with regard to what has happened and what will happen. And there are many ongoing investigations as well, as you mentioned, with under the authority of the US president. The question is also whether the US president has actually the authority to do many of the things he has done. And to challenge this is not something easy. It has to be done mainly it's obviously trying to be done in the WTO, but we know where the WTO stands. So there are not that many other international forums where these policies can be challenged. And the other ones are local courts. And I understand that this takes a lot of time as well. It's not something that is clear-cut with regard to this authority. And there are, I think, I understand a couple of cases that have been already started to challenge this authority, but it will take time to see what happens with this. And by the time these results come, these decisions may have already taken consequences. So my last point, for not taking more time, is should we look at this as a 4-year uncertainty in terms of will the new administration after Trump leaves the presidency will will the U.S. continue with these policies, or will there be a shift back to where we were before he started adopting these decisions? I think they will continue in a way. I think the U.S. has been in certain aspects meeting this or pursuing the same objectives. It's just probably how they are doing it, what is different. And I think that at this time, it was, as I said, too quick. Probably a little bit too aggressive for some countries, and we are still reacting to those measures. So there is still much story to tell.
Thank you, Carlos. I would like to take advantage of the presence of Fernando to also ask for his point of view on this question, but I will also post another questions to Fernando that is kind of linked to this climate of uncertainty that we are dealing with. So a couple of years ago, Mexico displaced China as the top trading partner of the United States, achieving a greater share of the U.S. trading goods within the world. In 2024, it still was. So these actions not only impact trade, but also investment. How is Mexico facing these actions? What has this meant in terms of investment growth in Mexico? Could you also provide a quick overview of Mexico's investment outlook?
Thank you, Samantha, and also I'm really happy to be here with you. Thank you, Ricardo RH, for the invitation. Thank you, Hugo, also. I'm happy to be with Maria and Eleanor. Good afternoon to everyone. And well, I have a presentation that actually, I don't know if we can put it. And I promised Samantha that she's really worried about my presentation because it's really long. But I promised her it will be really quick. So yeah, don't worry, Samantha. It's only going to take 5 minutes. Yeah, it's long, and I'm happy to share this presentation, obviously, with all of you. And well, as I say, thank you for the invitation. I am right now in the office as General Director of Foreign Direct Investment and Ministry of Economy, coming in representation of my boss, Ismael Ortiz, the Chief of Unit, and Undersecretary Luis Rosendo. Right now, Undersecretary is in Mexico, is not in Washington, but maybe tomorrow will be in Washington. But as you can imagine, he's traveling a lot for all these tariffs issue that Carlos, you explained. And just in this part, and really quick before entering to the presentation, speaking about really quick the government perspective and Trump administration, I agree completely with Carlos when he said that it's too soon to know what is going to happen, but at least we have a plan in the Mexican administration. And this plan is to continue growing the relationship with the United States and Canada. Canada and the United States are our biggest, obviously, partners, and we want to continue this integration, taking into account that right now with Trump, it's really complex, this part. And also, we have the issue that we are receiving and also seen as really important player with other countries, obviously including China. If we see the information that we have of the general direction, we can see that China is not part yet of our 10 top investors country in Mexico investments. He is right now in 14th place. And actually with this new data that we are just about to issue today or tomorrow of the first quarter of 2025, China, it's almost the 18th country in Mexico for investment, not trade investment, right? So this thing that we are hearing that China is the backdoor for Mexico is not true, at least in the numbers, because you need to make difference between the investment that it's already in Mexico and the announcements that the companies does. But well, in this part of China, but obviously with Trump, we are struggling to see what will need next steps. At this moment, we can see Mexico is not in the best situation, obviously, but it's in a better situation than other countries. We have tariffs applying only to some sectors, like obvious aluminum and steel. We have to see the rule of origin and the auto parts sector to see the tariff that would apply to the auto parts sector and to see if the auto company will pay the 25% or will pay less. We are in that negotiation at this moment, also trying to take out the tariff for steel and aluminum. And if, as you know, if we accomplish with USMCA rules of origin, Mexico will still have for a 0% USMCA products. So it's not the best scenario, obviously, but at least we are better than other countries, and we are trying to work with this to integrate more with the United States during these 4 years of Trump administration. So really quick, the presentation I have to you, it's a really quick overview about the Mexican landscape and the things that we do in our office. I will not stop really quick in this information. As you know, all this information about macroeconomic statistics in Mexico, little bit what we want to achieve with Plan Mexico, you will see in a moment. And the good, obviously, I came from the government, I need to have good news for you, but we are seeing some macroeconomics information and statistics that are really good for Mexico at this moment. Also information that you can find in the IMF. We have our trade agreements that it's still in place. Part of also of the Mexican strategy is to have a revision of the USMCA agreement. We are not in this moment willing to enter into a renegotiation as we do in 2017, 2018, but obviously we will need to see what will be Trump's approach to this and USTR to this issue. But at this moment, we are preparing to have a revision, and if it's a renegotiation, also we are ready for that part. A little bit what we want for Mexico in 2030 to be one of the 10 most important economies in Mexico, in the world. It is complicated, obviously. It not only depends on our free trade agreements, it's also depending on infrastructure, local regulations, etc. So it's a lot of job to be done, but President Claudia Sheinbaum is trying to put this in Plan Mexico, also a really important economic export in the world. How we are, that is why the integration is so important. Our exportation web, you can see there, it's really similar, United States, Canada, and Mexico. I mean, this information, we will have it. It's just going really quick to see a little bit more numbers of foreign direct investment. Also, the investment that we have in the public sector, in the private sector, and how this is really important for Plan Mexico and to achieve President Claudia Sheinbaum really the goals, ambitious goals she put in Plan Mexico. This center to my office, this is the last numbers that we have of foreign direct investment in Mexico also, and obviously people like Carlos are really more in touch with foreign investors in Mexico than we are. We are trying to receive investors in my office and try to help them in the soft landing, or if they have new investment projects in Mexico. But it's for sure that a lot of companies are still in a standby process right now to see what will be the reaction to Trump. And also, and we need to say this, the reaction to issues that are also happening inside Mexico. Our only problem is not Trump. We have internal issues that we need to see and to solve. The Minister of Economy is working with this dependency to do that, but also we need to address these issues internally in order to be and continue being an interest country for foreign direct investment. But this is the number. You can see that for the last part of last year, we grew 2% compared to 2023, and this is good news, at least because if you see UNCTAD information, the foreign direct investment in other countries decreased 8%. So Mexico is still having a good moment in investment, and I cannot give the information of this quarter because I think tomorrow President Sheinbaum will say it, or my boss, Secretary Brad, and I will get really spoiled exactly. And as you know, in political, that is a more important thing. But we are going to have good information, at least from my perspective. I know a lot of people will say, hey, new investments, reinvestment, etc., right? But at least we are going to have a number, a good number. And this is already the reality that we are seeing from Trump. Let's see the second quarter in Mexico, but this first quarter, it's going to be something at least manageable for us. Going on, this is more information about the last information that we have in my office. My office is in charge of the National Commission of Foreign Direct Investment, la Comisión Nacional de Inversión Extranjera. Is also in charge of the RENIET, that we have this information, the National Register of Foreign Investment, Registro Nacional de Inversión Extranjera. That is a really important number, that is actually the only macroeconomic number that the Minister of Economy issue, and this is this foreign direct investment number, that it's also part of the central bank and information the central bank will give on Friday. Our top investment countries in 2024, US, Japan, Germany, Canada, Netherlands. This quarter we will change to Spain, for example, to France, because it depends what the companies report to us and the nationality of the investment. It's really moving this part. Also, this is a part of the states. This in my office, we're working really hard in this part because to see Mexico City there is not accurate. I mean, and the numbers say it, but it's because the RFC, the number of the company, the legal number of the company, it's registered in the city, but it's not registered where the investment actually is happening. So we are trying to move this number and trying to help the states as Mexico State, Baja California, etc., Nuevo León, so the companies actually register the foreign direct investment in their states and not in Mexico City. And Mexico City agree with this part because we need to have a good number in order to know the reality. This is about the public investment announcement. It's really quick just to say that we don't need to mix the information. One thing is the Registro Nacional de Inversiones and the thing that we have in the register, and another thing is the announcements. The announcement is more a political issue. These are things that you see in the Mañanera with President Sheinbaum saying a lot of money to invest, but it's only announcement, and our job in the office is to solve this investment into actually real investment, right? More general information about public investment announcements, the states that we have the most important announcement right now. And if you need to check this information, we have a really important, good page with Ismael, that is Data Mexico. Happy to check that part. I will pass this really quick just to, in another a chat that we can go more deeply in Plan Mexico, but also we are applying Plan Mexico in the general direction of foreign direct investment, trying to help and to get to the number that President Sheinbaum wants to have on 2030 and the goals that she put over there. That is a really ambitious goal, but we need to work in order to get to those goals. In general, the private sector have welcomed really good the Plan Mexico, but obviously we are in a part that we still in the clouds, and we need to go down with Plan Mexico, obviously. Information from Plan Mexico. This is really important, and I will almost finish my presentation. Samantha, don't worry, is the tools that we have in my office to help foreign direct investments. The instruction that we have right now from Secretary Brad is to help soft landing to foreign direct investments, taking into account all the complex issue that we have in other countries and in Mexico. So we have La Ventanilla Única de Inversiones, the only single window of investors, and RUPI, Registro Único de Proyectos de Inversión, a single register of projects of investment. The Ventanilla, it's an information platform that you can check any moment you want. It's all information about states, micrositios, sites that you will have information for regulations in specific Mexico states. But the register is really important. It's for company that wants to apply. It's not obligations. It's a company from my office, and Paulina and Leonor, it's part of this office that have these projects, is to accompany hand-by-hand companies, that foreign direct companies that want to have new investment projects in Mexico, above $100 million. So we help them in order to have permits, in order to have tables, and to speak with other dependencies. We are like the middle people to help the companies with the relationship with other federal dependencies. And the last part, well, the announcement of investment, and the last part, the national register that I just speak about, National Register for Investment, is this information that we spoke at the beginning. And hopefully tomorrow you will see the new number of 2025. And yeah, that's it. Really quick about a quick overview of the foreign direct investment in the office. And thank you, Samantha.
Thank you, Fernando. You really spoke really fast. I hope our audience can digest all these numbers, but as you mentioned, you will be sharing these interesting presentations on how investment is growing in Mexico. And you know that when investing, investors also seek legal certainty in the countries where they are investing. Of course, investors in the North America region have a long-standing relationship. Some of the investments in the region are really integrated. So I would like to seek Eleanor and Carlos' view on what is the impact for investors and their investments in Mexico and in the United States. Can we expect challenges under the investor state dispute settlement mechanism arising, for example, from these tariff regimes imposed by the Trump administration? And what does these claims may look like?
Thank you, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me here as well. I'm happy to address this from a U.S. perspective, although I will begin by saying it is, of course, very complicated. So in terms of what these sort of claims might look like, taking the last question first, I think there are a few sort of, I'll call them obvious examples of substantive protections that exist in treaties, bilateral, multilateral investment treaties, as well as in trade promotion agreements that could, in theory, apply to these tariff regimes. The first is, of course, the substantive protections against discriminatory conduct that come in the form of national treatment obligations and most favored nation treatment obligations. The second are violations of fair and equitable treatment, particularly where that pertains to the obligation to not treat investors in a way that is arbitrary or to subject them to unreasonable government conduct. And the third, and I pull this one from prior investment treaty claims involving tax regimes, which are implemented somewhat similarly to tariffs, is the substantive protection against expropriation and measures tantamount to expropriation, so long as those measures are undertaken, discriminatorily, without public purpose and without adequate compensation or due process to the investor. So I do think that there are certain treaty regimes that could, in theory, apply. But with those in mind, I think there are also a couple of significant hurdles that an investor might face in trying to bring one of these claims. The first is really how to frame the investment itself. And this is because the nature of tariffs is such that they affect imported products on a domestic market and on a sort of sector basis within the economy. And so to be subject to treaty protections, investors have to be able to show that they have an investment in the territory of the country that enacted the tariff, that they are an investor in that country as well, and that the tariff is affecting them in that particular host state market. It can't simply be an effect on the company where it exists at home. And the reality is, I think that many investors that are subject to the current tariff regimes on the import of their goods don't have significant operations in the country in which they are importing the goods to. That is not always the case. Obviously, there are certain investors in the United States in particular, in the solar industry, that have an investment in the United States that depends significantly on imports from their home country. But I think that that's the sort of outlier case at the moment. I've been sort of trying to conduct a brief survey myself about this. And I think this is particularly true, this particular shortcoming or difficulty in the case of the agricultural tariffs that form a lot of the retaliatory tariffs announced against the United States. And this is because, obviously, in the case of agriculture, it is domestically produced and then shipped abroad. And so the particular investment that an investor might be trying to protect in the agricultural sector abroad is really a portion of a supply chain. And it's difficult and very much depends on the language of the treaty that applies, whether that can, in fact, qualify as an investment. The second potential hurdle relates to the justification for tariffs. And this is because while the potential treaty claims that I mentioned seem facially applicable, the stated justification for these tariffs, and I take no position on the right or wrongness of that stated justification, and even the retaliatory tariffs, is frequently protection of domestic industry, which could constitute, in theory, a valid public purpose for enacting the measures. And in that sense, I note that the US-Mexico-Canada agreement that we've talked about does include provisions in its articles on national treatment and most favored nation treatment alike that state that whether the foreign investor bringing the claim is deemed to be in like circumstance, which is required for bringing one of these claims, you must be in like circumstance with a domestic company, depends on whether the treatment at issue distinguishes between investors and investments, and here I'm quoting, on the basis of legitimate public welfare objectives. And as Maria Jose explained, the administration of President Trump has invoked through its use of Section 232 and Section 301, both domestic protections and national security in enacting the tariffs that it has put forward. And of course, another key feature of the USMCA is the limitation on ISDS claims. And so with respect to Mexico, the claims are limited between Mexico and the United States to national treatment, most favored nation treatment, and direct expropriation. An example of this potentially comes in the case of Vento Motorcycles v. Mexico, which was a NAFTA case several years ago. The claimant was a US company that brought claims under NAFTA, alleging that Mexico had denied it the benefit of preferential import tariffs, in that case, duty-free regimes, that it said impacted its sales in Mexico. The claimant did not contest the findings of Mexican authorities that they were not of US origin, the particular imported motorcycles, but they did allege that the review was undertaken at the behest of the incumbent motorcycle industry leaders and the Automotive Industry Association. So I'll note that first, the tribunal there did find that there was an investment in Mexico in the form of an enterprise created by joint venture, but it found that the claim that Mexico had exercised its authority at the behest of local industry was not supported by evidence, and that was a very strong finding in the award, and did not constitute arbitrary or discriminatory treatment. And so that it sort of illustrates how these hurdles might arise in cases involving tariffs. I think one other issue really relates specifically to the United States, which is simply that in the context of claims either against the US government or by US investors against foreign governments, there aren't very many investment treaties to which the United States is a party. And the tariffs include tariffs against China, Vietnam, Japan, Indonesia, India, and the European Union, with none of which the US has a current investment treaty. And thus, in many cases, there may not be a treaty to rely on. But with all of those things in mind, I'll conclude with just a few statistics on foreign direct investment in the United States, in part an answer to what Fernando told us about Mexico. I don't have the most up-to-date data because I only have what's publicly available. But according to data reported by the US Department of Commerce, as of October 2024, the majority of foreign direct investment in the United States was in the manufacturing sector. And greenfield investment, which is defined as establishing or expanding on a foreign-owned business in the United States, totaled $8.1 billion in 2022, of which $5.3 billion was dedicated to the manufacturing sector. And as of 2021, the ultimate beneficial owners of most majority-owned US affiliates of foreign multinational enterprises were found in Europe first, followed by Japan, and then by Canada. Thank you.
Eleanor, Carlos?
Have much to add. I think it's case by case at the end, but I see it very difficult to propose that tariff increases in themselves are in violation of investment standards. And the other question would be that, or the other issue I think is that after the USMCA, as was mentioned in the previous panel, the availability to challenge for discriminatory measures or, I mean, you can only file generally for discrimination or for expropriation. So there will be limits for all of those related with the minimum standard of treatment. And that's also an issue here because normally most of the investment cases relate with the minimum standard of treatment. So the chances of being of receiving cases under an investment treaty, I think, are extremely low, unless you can find probably a decision, and this is probably something to think about, where Mexico would like to react to counter the effects adopted or caused by these tariffs by providing assistance to specific companies or creating some sort of discrimination between local investors that put them in an advantageous position before others. So I think that, as I said, it has to be analyzed on a case by case, but I think it's important to follow up on what Mexico could be doing because it's not much about what we can, what Mexican investors could do in the US. Because Mexico also doesn't have that many investments in the US. And like you mentioned this case, and there was also the Cargill case, which Mexico argued before the Canadian courts against this case because Mexico was forced to pay one of the investors because of the investment they had in the US, but was extremely linked with the investment in Mexico. So and Mexico argued, this is trade, this is not investment, so we are not going to pay for damages caused to your trade. And I think this was in some sort of way incorporated in the USMCA in the definition of investment or what is not investment. And I think it says something about commercial contracts for the sale of goods or services. So you will first have to pass that hurdle of, okay, you are an investor. And the question here is, you're probably not, because those contracts are, or those violations are related with commercial contracts. So it will be difficult to bring a case, I think, against these measures.
Thank you, Carlos. Hugo, would you like to comment also on this question?
Yeah, thank you, Samantha. Just a brief reaction on this. If Mexico or other country takes countermeasures regarding the tariffs of the United States, then we will have a deja vu in the fructose cases. Do you remember ADM in 2000? 7, I think, where the panel discussed the nature of the substantive and procedural rights. And it determined that the substantive rights were between the states, but the procedural right, it means the right of the investor to initiate a case against Mexico was a self-contained regime, which implied that Mexico, maybe you remember in the fructose cases, Mexico imposed a tax on certain goods as a countermeasure reacting to the opposition of the United States to accept imports of sugar of Mexico. But the ADM case say, well, the procedural right that has investor is different. So, and this could be theoretically, at least, could we can see this from US investors affected by countermeasures or retaliatory measures, or non-US investors in Mexico. Particularly, and it would depend on the nature of the countermeasures. If it's tariffs, I mean, just reacting, increasing the tariffs, the hurdles that Eleanor mentioned will be also applicable here. But what happens if Mexico decides, as Ecuador at some point, when try to retaliate against the EU in the case on bananas? Ecuador said, I don't have, it's not feasible to retaliate on goods. I will affect intellectual property rights. So then investors will be affected and possibly they could initiate a case. I think that's another part of these tariff measures and retaliatory measures. Mexico has been very cautious in taking measures, but potentially we can see that. And finally, this morning, one of the speakers here mentioned the national security clause. If Mexico is taking countermeasures, could say this is to defend my national security. And in certain VITs, it has a special clause like I take the VIT Mexico-Switzerland that says dispute settlement does not apply when there is a national security issue, as in the recent case in Angel Seda and others against Colombia. So, thank you.
Thank you, Hugo. And I will stay with you because you are touching the point of how to challenge these measures. The imposition of tariffs under these U.S. domestic laws appear to be inconsistent with international trade agreements. Few countries, and I think Maria Hussein in her presentation already talked about some of the WTO disputes. Some countries like Canada and China have challenged these measures under international dispute settlement mechanisms, while others, and you already mentioned the Mexican position, have taken a more conservative stance. So is there, in your view, a general discouragement in the use of this mechanism, and what could be the reasons for that?
Thank you, Samantha. And I think we are facing a crisis of the rule of law. Basically, a president is imposing tariffs and there is no remedy or not quick remedy. Another country is taking countermeasures and it's exactly the same. And since December 2019, when the appellate body was not functioning anymore, for good or for bad, I don't know. But after that, simply the number of cases initiated under WTO have been decreased a lot. Others, like myself, say, okay, well, now that the WTO is not functioning very well, maybe we can see more cases under the regional trade agreements. In the case of the USMCA, it happened. But still the numbers are very, very, very low. Mainly because I think that now this is the crisis of the rule of law, or we are in a transition period where after the end of the Uruguay round and the establishment of the WTO in 1995, we saw many cases. The jewel of the crown was a dispute settlement system, and within that jewel was the appellate body. But since, as I mentioned, since some years, well, we haven't seen any intention of the Biden administration to make it functional. And during the Trump first and second administration, in the second, I'm not sure what will happen. But currently, just trying to initiate a case maybe is a waste of time, precisely because the nature of I wouldn't say the nature, but the imposition of tariffs have changed right now. I don't know whether in the last 40 minutes that we started, there is a new post in the Truth Social, but I think it is the idea of the crisis of the rule of law. Or maybe we are in a transitional period where after the success of multilateralism, countries are changing policies and they will build a new system. I don't know when it will end, but I think the uncertainty of the tariffs is what is most discouraging the trade. Paul Krugman say, well, if anyone knows that in the following 4 years, there will be a 25% of tariffs, well, you make the adjustments. But now, you don't know. You don't know if now it's 25 and it goes to 100%, but they are reduced, an exception is made. So I will stop here, but I see a very difficult time for lawyers that are lobbying dispute settlement rules. But, well, maybe we are very traditional, orthodox, and we are not adapting to the new reality. And the new reality is the presidents are taking more policy space. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugo. And I would like to seek also Eleanor's point of view from the U.S. perspective.
Thank you. I'll offer just two very brief comments on this. First is that, as I mentioned before, there are so few multilateral or bilateral investment agreements to which the U.S. is a party. The WTO remains one of the primary bodies in which U.S. policies can be brought to bear. And so with respect to both Canada and China, which have requested consultations with the U.S. about the tariffs, the U.S. did respond in both cases. It accepted consultations, but it did so with notwithstanding the official U.S. stance that the tariffs that formed the subject of the consultations are a matter of national security. And going back to national security carve-outs, the WTO has one. And so the U.S. maintains that it is not susceptible to review or capable of resolution by WTO dispute settlement. So it's sort of an interesting question whether you take the only option available to you to request these consultations and see what happens with it, or if you take the stance that it's not going to work, and so you have to do what you have to do. The second very brief comment to I think the sort of last point that Hugo made, in January of this year, the government of Panama filed a request, an appeal from a panel decision involving imports from Costa Rica, which noted that, this is in the body of the request, as there are no appellate body members to compose a division to hear Panama's appeal at this time, Panama awaits further instructions from the division once composed on any further steps to be taken by Panama in this appeal. And so I think there is a sort of a request from the international community to figure out how we can get these mechanisms working again.
Thank you, Eleanor. We are in the time where Trump has reached its 100-day mark at the end of April. And in that time, I'm referring to first and second administration, he withdrew the United States from several UN accords and the TPP, among other agreements. So how have the major trading partners of the US and other countries in Latin America reacted to this economic nationalism? And I would like to seek the views of Carlos on this issue.
I think the main question for many is whether this is actually good for the US or this is actually against its own policies, because some countries are feeling left like thrown into China's arms or closer to China. So if you have a trade relationship with the US and suddenly they raise you tariffs and they put you in a difficult economic situation or position, and you have China offering you better conditions, it is difficult for these countries to decide whether to keep working with the US or whether to move more towards China. So I think that's what I say. This would counter the logical reasonableness of the measures adopted by the US. But I think this is an adjustment period. I think countries are taking sides, which is something interesting. I believe that at least Mexico has, from my perspective, chosen 100% a US team. And the investment figures, obviously, China is trying to get to many of these other countries to get some of their products that cannot access the US, or at least in theory, that's what's happening, trying to get some of those inputs in these other countries to be transformed or to comply with the rules of origin and then sent to the US. So I believe that the US will still have to address that issue. It's not regulated per se bilaterally. So we may see more future changes in terms of how we relate with the US in our rules of origin and what will happen with this foreign content. They are already in the auto industry. They have clearly sent signals that they will move trying to get rid of these non-US or regional inputs or tariff that part that is not from the region. So these are new formulas that we are seeing now, and that is something that will be interesting to keep an eye on. But Mexico, as I said, the reaction for Mexico has been not to adopt any retaliation measure against the US. So this is what other countries have chosen to do as well. And many are negotiating now with the US on better conditions. Mexico has done pretty well. Canada and the EU and obviously China adopted a more aggressive reaction or mirroring the US decisions in a way. But the EU and Canada were contained because of these obvious flexibilities that were announced by the US and granted. So we can see that things are falling now back again where they were at the beginning. So the US is making clear that they have these objectives, that they want partners to comply with the regulations. And probably this sends me back to the origin of the CPTPP or the TPP. I understood the TPP to be a treaty where the US or the countries that were participating in that treaty were going to agree on higher standards of international trade compliance that will leave countries out of that group in a non-compliant situation, so they could not sell or put their products into those markets because they will not be compliant with those high standards. But when the US decided to move out of the CPTPP, it really created a question of, well, then what is the actions that the US will take or will adopt after this? And what we saw is, well, I'm going to take unilateral decisions. I'm not going to take any more negotiated decisions with anybody. I'm going to impose my own understanding of the regulations, obviously invoking national security, which I should say that it is interesting to see where they come from with this national security. At that time, we had COVID. At that time, we have the Suez Canal blockage. We had the microprocessors crisis. We had the tensions between Ukraine and Russia. So there were many events taking place that if you look at them from a trade perspective, it shows that many countries were vulnerable to these events that were taking place in the world. So they realized if we need, for example, and this is my understanding, I don't know, if we need to produce ventilators to address an emergency, a health emergency on a biological war, and we don't have the inputs to do it here, so we will lose that war. If we don't have the microprocessors and we need to face counterattacks on piracy or how to say technological warfare. I don't know. You don't have the input. So there were many things that if you put yourself in a defensive position, you see that many of us are still very vulnerable because of this globalization. Having said that, I don't think globalization is going to be finished. I think everyone that can take advantage of globalization will do better than those that are going to close themselves into as a closed economy. But I think that what we'll see is clear sides on who is making trade deals with who.
Thank you, Carlos. And I would also like to seek Eleanor's views on this question. Thank you, Eleanor.
I'll be very, very brief. I think the first point I'd make on this is obviously that as the CPTPP example shows, these multilateral agreements move on without the United States. And I think it was perhaps a surprise to some members of the US government that did occur. But the CPTPP is now also growing with China, Taiwan, and the United Kingdom seeking to accede to it as of 2021. And the second thing I'll note is simply that within the United States, this does remain an ongoing conversation. And I think I'll give the example of the Paris Agreement on climate change in President Trump's first term. He did withdraw the United States from the Paris Agreement that was effective November of 2020. 4 months later, when President Biden took office, he brought the United States back into the agreement. And then on the day of his inauguration, President Trump, on January 20th of this year, signed an executive order ordering the United States to once again withdraw from the Paris Agreement. So I think this serves to highlight some of the tension between the American first policy on the one hand and global commitments. And I'll note that, including those of environmental groups and individual US states. And one example is California, which is a huge producer of solar energy and which signed in 2017 the We Are Still In letter that committed to maintaining the obligations of the Paris Agreement, notwithstanding the US withdrawal.
Eleanor, Fernando?
Thank you, Samantha, and also really brief on this part of how some countries are preparing and are facing this Trump crisis or this issue from China, etc. A little bit of perspective of Mexico and the Ministry of Economy particularly, and really agree what Carlos just said about the local inputs and how you need to be prepared on this part. And actually, this is a core issue of Plan Mexico of Presidenta Sheinbaum. And this is before we have Trump's elected, we have the view in this government to have this issue of national proveeduría, national, what do you say? Supply chain, exactly, yeah. And it's not good to get confused about changing from substitution of imports. This program that we have in the 60s, 70s is not the same thing. We are looking here to help foreign, if it's the case, foreign investors to come to Mexico and to produce things that we are not producing at this moment. This is happening a lot in the auto sector, for example, tier 1 and tier 2. We have a lot of meetings with all these kind of companies trying to say, hey, come to Mexico at that moment, and let's try to make this supply chain internally in Mexico. It's not easy. It's not something that is going to happen in a short term. And also you need to make also this question that we have this uncertainty on Trump tariffs. Nevertheless, we're trying to go with these companies. And at this moment, it's, okay, let's see a North America supply chain. So if they are moving a little bit of this production also to US or to Canada, it's not bad seen at the Mexican government at this point. So we're trying to move on this direction and trying to help new supply chain in Mexico, new also Mexican providers, so they can provide to these big industries that we have in Mexico and then account with this Plan Mexico in order to achieve this.
Thank you, Fernando. And now that you are mentioning this North American supply chain, obviously considering this US administration position towards China, Canada and Mexico, it is difficult for Canada and Mexico just to remain passive. So obviously this tension has have a disruptive effect in trade and investment. And we have seen that the United States has implemented measures on outbound and inbound investment. Is Mexico considering similar actions or taking steps to monitor Chinese investment coming to the country?
Thank you, Samantha. I don't know if Lauren helped you with this question, but no, yeah,
From the
thank you.
US point of view.
No, yes, I think it's understandable. At this moment, US have a mechanism, it's CFIUS. Canada have also a mechanism. A mechanism is the Investment Canada Act, and also the European countries have a mechanism in order to make traceability on issues regarding national security on foreign direct investment. So I will not target a specific this mechanism to China because we have seen, for example, the United States also targeting other countries' investment, Japan investments on steel, maybe Turkish investment, things like this. But yes, we have a speak with the US and Mexico. It's right now revising if it's necessary for Mexico to have this kind of screening mechanism, right? Not only it's not going only to apply to China, it's going to apply to any foreign direct investment coming to Mexico. So we need to be careful not to make this a new border, a new stone for foreigners in Mexico, because we don't want to do that. We want to help them and we want to establish in Mexico. So if they have the judicial reform, if they have Trump, if they had another issues they need to deal with, and now we are going to put a new issue and revise all the investment that we enter on national security basis, it will be complex. We are revising. If we are going to apply this, we want to do it as general as possible, not mandatory, and trying to be in a middle way that is similar from when CFI started, not being that harsh. But at this point, we don't have any decision yet taken. We are just analyzing and studying the cases that we have on other countries.
Thank you, Fernando. And what is the impact of these measures on investment from your perspective?
Well, I think that after tariffs, the next phase of US measures is looking at where China is investing, what those facilities are producing. In September last year, Catherine Tai mentioned that they were working on a supply chain resilience policy, basically based on 4 elements: transparency, diversity and diversification, security, and sustainability. And based on that, the United States will take a new policy, which, by the way, is open to public comments until June 4th. I think the result of that will be very, very important, particularly in countries like Mexico. Fernando mentioned that is not in the top 15 of China is not in the top 15 as a FDI source, but the announcements is the second. So BYD, for example, mentioned that they are planning to, in last November, they are planning to have a facility to produce cars, and they are saying, we are not planning to send cars to the United States. Yes, but still it's a concern, because if Mexico is consuming BYD cars and they are only exporting cars to the United States, to a certain way is affecting the United States. But I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugo. We are reaching the end of our panel, but I would like to take at least one question from the audience. If anyone has a question, please feel free to raise her hand.
Thank you very much to the panelists for this formidable presentation. And thank you for taking my question. So my question will be, to what extent can Mexico leverage the nearshoring phenomenon to achieve truly equitable and sustainable economic development across all regions of Mexico beyond immediate beneficiaries and within the context of the current economic ongoing happens? Thank you.
Who wants to take this one, or everybody?
What the main program in Mexico that has supported our export is manufacturing, and it's the IMEX program. So I think that there is supposedly to be announced or published a renewed version of the IMEX in the next month or next couple of months. It has been delayed. But unfortunately, before that, what we've seen is that the Ministry of Treasury, the Secretaría de Hacienda, has been looking at trade as a source of incomes. So they are very active into seeking who is complying or not with the rules, but not with the objective of putting them into compliance, but to actually collect money from them. So if they continue pursuing that with that mindset, I think it will inhibit the investment. It will make investors think about really, some of them actually moving out of Mexico. And for example, there were just recently some exemptions granted to the import of textiles for certain companies that were exporting, and not all of the companies received these exemptions. So the companies that didn't receive these exemptions are extremely concerned because they will have to fire thousands of people and probably close businesses in Mexico. I know that Ministry of Economy has been dealing with this, and they're trying to obviously avoid abuses of the program. But in response to your question, I think the main change or the policies that should be sought is how to foster the existing programs, how to make them a success, to increase investment and to increase our exports into the US. And like you said, probably not only in the north of Mexico, but also try to move production to other states of the Republic, which is something that is being sought with creating more infrastructure, having more access to cheapest energy, water. So there are many other concerns that inhibit investment sometimes because you need this type of investments to create more to have more investment.
Carlos. Anyone? Well, I would like to thank our panelists for your insightful contributions, and thank you to our audience for joining us in this important conversation. It is clear that the Trump effect will continue to influence economic decisions, policy debates, and even geopolitical alignments in the years to come. We hope that today's discussion has provoked some thoughts on this issue. And thank you again. I'd like to invite you to stay for our last panel of the day.